this video, we're going to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart: how to inject personality and even humor into your playing through a technique known as quotes. Now, when I talk about personality in our playing, I immediately think of some of my biggest heroes, all of our favorite musicians, trumpet players such as Lee Morgan, Freddie Hubbard, Roy Hargrove, Clifford Brown, Louis Armstrong, Dizzy Gillespie, Clark Terry. If there was one common thread that you could say about all of these players, is that they had a distinct personality all their own. You could tell it was them playing from the very first note that you heard. And so one of my goals that I always want to achieve when I'm playing is to sound personal and to sound human. You know, that's why we have human beings play music and not robots. So what do I mean when I say we want to have personality in our playing? Well, all of those trumpet players and these great jazz musicians that we think of had ways, calling cards, if you will, little techniques and tricks that they would do that were all their own. And a lot of that can be how we color notes and various inflections. For example, a robot might play a scale like this. But if you wanted to inject personality, you might use inflections, you might color some of the notes, you might use different levels of vibrato. The same scale, but the second version of it had much more of a unique, individualistic, personal sound than merely just playing the notes on the page. And one of the ways that we can inject this personality into our playing, apart from inflections, using vibrato, coloring notes in the way that I mentioned, is a jazz device known as quotes and quoting. Now, you might not be familiar with this. So what is a quote? A quote is defined as a commonly known melody or fragment meant for recognition. So if you're quoting another song, the idea is that people will understand, recognize the song that you're quoting before. And a lot of times, learning a quote to me is the same thing as learning a different jazz cliche or lick or riff. It's just another common piece of bebop and jazz vocabulary and language. And some musicians maybe find it a little bit corny, or they feel like it's not something that is a part of their style. But if we look through the timeline of jazz music, especially with the beboppers, all the way from Charlie Parker, who would quote classical music pieces in his solos, all the way up to Roy Hargrove, quotes have always been part of our jazz language. So when I say, where do we find these quotes? It can be, as I mentioned, Charlie Parker, who would pull from classical repertoire. But the first kind of general idea of where we find quotes are simply fragments of other jazz melodies, from standards, songs from jazz composers like Monk, Charlie Parker, Wayne Shorter, and these are widely understood fragments. For example, if in the middle of my solo I played this, would you know what that is? Salt Peanuts, Dizzy Gillespie. So we can have a lot of fun and expression, and that's where the idea of humor comes in, because when you're playing a quote, the whole idea is that other people are listening and are brought in on the joke that you are presenting. This can be for other people in the band. It can even be for people in the audiences. For example, some of the greatest moments that I've had performing in Japan is where some of the audiences have recognized when I play a quote on a different song, and they would actually clap and cheer in the middle of my solo because they recognized the quote of a different familiar song that they had referenced. So it really can be a fun way, again, to get us out of sounding robotic and remember that jazz connects us all, and we are all human beings speaking this connected musical language. So the first place that we find quotes is through common jazz melodies, right? And a lot of melodies, particularly from the Great American Songbook, are very simple melodic phrases. They're often very diatonic, which means we can put them on top of a number of different songs and a number of different combinations. Other places that you can find these quotes from, apart from jazz standards, is, as we mentioned, Charlie Parker would look at classical music at times, but we can move that forward and say your favorite TV theme song. It can be from films and scores and popular music. It can be even from video game music that we all have now gotten into as becoming a standard repertoire of its own. And also music that I like to call common thread music. Now, this could be nursery rhymes, this could be patriotic music, national anthems, any piece of music that people are going to recognize and be able to connect with. Now, when we talk about how you apply these quotes, you can do so with the direct harmonic correlation. And what that means is, for example, say we're going to quote a song that originally is in the key of concert C minor. Well, when might be a good time to play that quote? Perhaps sometime when you're playing a song in C minor. You know that the harmony is going to correlate there. But also, you can use something called harmonic transposition. And with that, we find other chord qualities that this quote, this melodic phrase and fragment, lends itself to. And I'm going to now take you over to the piano and show you an example of how I use some very common jazz quotes from jazz standards and other pieces of music and search for different chord qualities that I can place that quote over. So let's head over to the piano. So, for the example of harmonic transposition, we're going to take a very simple quote from a very well-known jazz standard, and that is this. Softly as in a morning sunrise. Now that beginning phrase of that melody is always traditionally in this key, C minor. So naturally, any song that we play in the key of C minor, we would be able to put this quote over top of it. But because we don't want to be limited to, when we're playing our quotes, only the key that we learned the quote in. Much in the same way, when you learn any lick from a solo, say you transcribe a blues lick in the key of B flat. Why do we learn it in all 12 keys? So that we can then play that language over any song in any key. So when you're learning your quotes and you're pulling these different melodic fragments, make sure that we can play them in all 12 keys, in the same way that we would treat it as if it were any other lick that we were learning from a solo. So on and so forth. So we're learning the quote in all 12 keys, first of all. But something that you do when you're seated at the piano here, and you can plump out some chords. There's our C minor. Now I will actually experiment over different chord qualities and test the melody against that chord quality and tell myself if it works or not. So I'll just go down in half steps chromatically. We're starting on that C minor. What happens if we were to play a B dominant with a flat 9? Would it work over that? Sort of. So if we keep going down, the next chromatic one would be a B flat. So we say B flat 7 sus. Kind of works, right? Keep going down. The next we have is A. So I would say an A7 dominant with also a sharp 9. That one sounds pretty nice. So you keep going, trying these different chord qualities like this. Now A flat major. Oh, that one's really nice, right? And say you get to a specific root here, like A flat, and you try A flat minor. No, that doesn't work. But all of a sudden you try that A flat again with major and it works. What would A flat dominant 7? That dominant doesn't work. So you're kind of trial and error. You're experimenting over these different chord qualities as you go down. So we have our C minor. Now we're down to G. There's a nice dominant with that flat 13 sound. That one's nice. I might quote that on my next solo when I get a nice fat G7 flat 13. Let's go down now to G flat. Try a sharp 11 dominant 7. Not quite. It half works. If you play it fast enough, it might work. Keep going down. Now we're on F, F7 sharp 11. That's really nice. Now we go down to E. Try that nice dominant altered sound. Now it almost works except for the last note, but what if we took that quote and still kept the essence of the quote, but changed maybe one note to make it fit the chord quality? So, for this E, that's the original, but what if I played... So just by changing the last note of our quote a half step to match the current chord quality, now all of a sudden you have a way to quote that melody over a different chord quality. So let's keep going. Now I'm at E flat, I'm trying E flat 7. Not quite. What about E flat major 7? It doesn't quite work. So now we're down to D. Try another crunchy dominant altered. Iffy. And then our final one here, now we're on D flat 7, sharp 11. Almost works, right? And so when you've now done this, you've just descended chromatically, you get back to your root. So by doing this, we can kind of take our little quote, which is really, again, like any other melody or lick that we might transcribe from a solo, and we can try it out over different chord qualities. So this way, you can plug that in over any chord sequence. It doesn't just have to be in the original key of the song that you learned it. So this is something that we can do with a lot of different melodic phrases. And once you start applying some of these quotes to your own playing, you're going to hear all of the heroes of the music, the architects of jazz language, bebop language, using the quote device all the time. Softly as a Morning Sunrise is a very obvious one. How about another one that is often quoted? 4, right, by Miles Davis. The original key is in E flat. Right? So that little phrase, ba-da-ba, 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 that could be used in any key over what? A major chord, right? Because we look at the melody, right? Ba ba ba, it's 5 6 7 5 6 7 5 6 7 5 4 3 5, right? So you can use that over any major chord. In any key. Concert C major. Right? So you take these little melodic fragments and you apply them to any song. Like, for example, I could quote 4 in the beginning of I'll Remember April. Right? So we're starting on concert G major. So for our trumpet players, that's the key of A. And as a bonus there at the end of that lick, I played a little bit of that Lydian sound, that sharp 11 sound. So, the fun becomes, the humor becomes, how creative can we get with these quotes? Can we be plugging in the theme to our favorite movie? Can we put in the Simpsons theme over the beginning of I'll Remember April, the Simpsons, the cartoon television show, right? The Simpsons. So where are we in G major? Starting on the root. It could also be Maria from West Side Story, right? So all of a sudden we're playing. Right? That's all over the first chord change to I'll Remember April. And of course, we never want to get carried away with this idea. You know, it comes from Spider-Man, the idea of with great power comes great responsibility. And we have to be careful not to overuse this technique and this tactic, because one or two quotes in the right place can be seen as very clever and can be something that the listeners and the audience and the band all kind of smile and they're in on the joke together. And it connects us all, to go with the theme. It brings us together. But if we use it too much, it can be seen as you know, too much of anything can be considered not such a great thing. So try and find creative ways to use it. Remember, we can pull from jazz melodies, Great American Songbook melodies, any piece of music that is popular, that is widely known, and challenge yourself to plug it in over different chord qualities as we experimented here, and add it to your vocabulary, much like all of the scales and riffs and licks that we're learning transcribing solos. Add some quotes and help add some personality into your playing.